Hello everyone. The video this week is going to be kind of short because you've got your midterm going on, and I've got another video about your first writing assignment. So I just want to make this video kind of short and sweet, but I do want to set up some history for the 16th century, because next week we're going to start Shakespeare, and it's important for you to know a little bit of background about what's going on in the world before you get to Shakespeare himself. So we are moving in to the second volume of your textbook set. So we're in the bigger volume, volume B, and it starts with the 16th century. So 16th century, we're in the 1500s. And a couple of things that I want to be sure you understand by the end of the video is that English is becoming an important language. So prior to this, I guess this century, English is a common, uneducated language. People who are educated, people who are important, they know Latin. English was not an important language to know, which is why it was so interesting that Chaucer decided to write his Canterbury Tales in English, because most learned men were writing in languages not English at the time. It's also important to know that finally, in the 16th century, England is stabilizing. We had the War of the Roses, what is known as the War of the Roses, prior to the 16th century. And so there's this constant power struggle between families in England. And finally, those families stopped fighting and consolidated their power, so England became strong, and that unification is what created the Tudor dynasty. So we'll talk about the Tudor dynasty. And then we're looking at, in this century, we're looking at the beginnings of Reformation, and then theater and entertainment through the Renaissance. So let's talk about England in the early 16th century and the language of English specifically. So there were a lot of rich men. When we talk about public and we talk about power moves, we are more than likely talking about men. There are a lot of rich British men who wanted to leave England. England was kind of thought across the world as this backwards country where they weren't keeping up with modern times. And the Renaissance in Italy started back in the 1300s, 13, 14, 1500s. The Italian Renaissance is going on. So all of these rich people in England wanted to travel the continent, and they wanted to experience all of these things that came along with the Italian Renaissance. But the Renaissance hasn't reached England yet. So what happened is these people, these rich British men, they had to learn English they had to learn other languages, They had to learn other languages like French and German and Italian in order to travel to these places who were already experiencing the Renaissance, because Italy, Germany, France, Spain, they were not learning English as a second language. So in order for these British men who wanted to leave England to really experience the Renaissance life, they had to learn the language of the countries where they were going. The book Utopia, written by Thomas More, we didn't even translate that book from Latin to English until halfway through the 16th century. So it took a long time for English to be, I guess, heralded in the world. English was not the first choice for languages. But by the time the end of the 16th century gets here, your book says that there were signs of a great increase in English language. Much more publication is happening in English. So even though English is not important until about halfway through the 16th century, by the end of the 16th century, English is gaining speed and is becoming very dominant. So let's talk about King Henry VII. He's an important guy. He is the founder of the Tudor dynasty, and the way that he founded the Tudor dynasty is King Henry VII was from the Lancaster house. He was a Lancaster. And the Lancasters and the Yorks were the two families fighting in the War of the Roses. So one family, their symbol was the red rose, and then the other family's symbol was a white rose. That's why we called it the War of the Roses, because the York family and the Lancaster family were fighting one another. Well, King Henry VII was a Lancaster, and he became the king in 1485 after he defeated the York king. But he wanted to bring peace to the country. He wanted to strengthen the country. So to do that, he married a York woman. So he married the daughter of his enemy. So when the York family and the Lancaster family came together, they created the Tudor dynasty. But Henry VII only did this if he knew that he would gain more power. So one of the stipulations for marrying this York woman was to be sure that the king had power and sovereignty over nations more so than his predecessors. So Henry VII was very well liked. In his courts, people wanted to be near him. They wanted him to like them. They wanted, they were hoping that if the king likes them considerably, then they would be promoted. They would gain more money, more social standing. So people wanted to be around Henry VII quite a bit. In fact, in your book, it even says that one job that people would fight over, one job that they wanted really badly, was called the groom of the stool. And what that means is people were fighting over the job to help Henry VII do everything that you do in a bathroom. So brush his hair, brush his teeth, give him a bath, toilet duties, like actual toilet duties. Anything that you would do in a bathroom, he had people that wanted to be in the bathroom with him to help him do all of those things. He was extremely popular. Not only is his popularity growing, but the population of London is growing as well. So we've got a lot of growth happening. So that's why the Renaissance is kind of important. So the Italian Renaissance spans, late 13th century up through the 17th century, started in Italy, and it spreads north. And it's Renaissance, the word Renaissance means rebirth. Now, the English Renaissance had a little bit different of a design than the rest of the countries in Europe. So the Renaissance really gave a rebirth to how the government was formed. Prior to the Renaissance, authority rested on the shoulders of the church. Laws were church matter. Everything was a church matter. Property was church matter. If you broke the law, you had to go to the church. If you did anything, you had to go through the church. And so during the Renaissance, what happened is that authority shifted, and so the church is not really in charge anymore. The states or the governments, they put a lot more stock in literature and letters and the arts than they previously had done. Another thing that changed in England through the Renaissance was the idea of education. So medieval, or before the Renaissance, medieval education, especially in England, was designed to make men good church leaders. That was its only job, was to teach them how to run the church, how to gain followers in the church, how to be a good church man. But the English Renaissance changed how people thought about education. And the term humanism started to be used. And what that means is, a man should be all that he can be. He should be well-rounded in all subjects. So instead of just reading, writing, and arithmetic, like the old ways, like the medieval way of educating men, we tried to look at how to educate men in a variety of subjects, because humanism meant that as long as you had the ability to learn, it was your responsibility to learn. So this type of model where we have all of these electives, everybody has English and literature and history and math, and everybody kind of has a few classes in all of the subjects, looks a lot like the way that we have education today. So today's education is loosely modeled from the English Renaissance aspect of education. So this is a picture of a 16th century classroom, and there are a couple of things that I want you to notice about it. All of the students are boys, so the idea here is that only rich men could be educated. Women received an education, but that education was geared more towards womanly duties, like how to cook and how to clean food for cooking, and how to create clothes, and how to keep a house. And so women weren't given a classroom education like the men were. And I want you to notice that this man right here on the left side of the picture is beating a student. He has like a whip here, and he's spanking this student right here. So corporal punishment was pretty common in 16th century education. They called it flogging. And flogging did not happen just because a student misbehaved. If a student wasn't learning something the way that they should be, or if a student wasn't learning fast enough for the teachers, then they would be flogged, because it was the student's responsibility to learn the material. So if they didn't learn it, no matter what, they were in the wrong, so they would be flogged. Of course, disobedient behavior would receive a flogging, but for the most part, these little boys or these young men would do their studies simply to avoid the violence of flogging. So that leads us into Henry VIII. Henry VIII is Henry VII's son, and he was originally called the Defender of Faith because he spoke out against the Reformation. So the Reformation is when the Catholic Church was kind of pushed aside so that the Protestant Church could rise. And King Henry VIII did not like the Protestants. He did not want the Protestant Church to rise. He defended the Catholic Church against the Reformation. But King Henry VIII was a selfish, self-serving man. And he realized that he married Catherine Aragon and tried to produce an heir, and she could not give him a male son. So medicine is not as advanced back then as it is today, so they had no idea that the woman has no power in what sex a baby is. So he thought it was her fault that she couldn't give him a male heir. She gave him a female heir, and he needed a man to ascend the throne when he died. So he wanted to divorce Catherine of Aragon, but the Catholic Church said no. The Catholic Church would not grant him a divorce. So King Henry says to everyone, well, I am the King of England, and that makes me the head of the Church of England, and the Church of England is Protestant, and Protestant churches allow divorces. So he changed the church in England from Catholic to Protestant and divorced Catherine of Aragon. He married Anne Boleyn, whom he was having an affair with, and tried to get an heir, or make an heir with Anne Boleyn. But Anne Boleyn had another girl. This girl soon became Queen Elizabeth I. But throughout all this, King Henry had created acts of succession. So what that means is when he divorced Catherine of Aragon and he married Anne Boleyn, he created this kingly decree that said any children that he had with Catherine of Aragon were no longer legitimate, and they could not be heirs to the throne. Only Anne Boleyn's children could do that. Well, when Anne Boleyn could not give him a son, he beheaded her, and he married Jane Seymour, who finally did give him a male heir, but King Edward died at 15. He was a very sickly child. But when he married Jane Seymour, another act of succession was created that illegitimized Anne Boleyn's children. So Queen Elizabeth I and Queen Mary were both illegitimate heirs of King Henry because of the acts of succession. I have posted a document just kind of explaining the acts of succession and like when they were happening and who they put out on Blackboard. This picture is Queen Mary, Bloody Mary. This is Catherine of Aragon's daughter. So this is King Henry VIII's first child. She does eventually become the Queen of England, and she is pretty terrible. She becomes the queen because she's very Catholic, and she becomes the queen named Bloody Mary because as she became the queen, she changed the religion in England back to Catholicism. She hated the Protestants, and therefore hated her father, and changed England's religion back to Catholicism. And she aided in the creation of what was called the Heresy Act. And the Heresy Act was responsible for hundreds of Protestants being burned at the stake, hundreds more being sent into exile. She was harsh, and they called her Bloody Mary because her reign was filled with bloodshed. If you're interested in Bloody Mary, there's a link to a YouTube video. It's only a few minutes long that just kind of goes through Queen Mary's life as Queen of England. Then we have Queen Elizabeth I. So she's the second Tudor queen. Henry VII's wife is the first Tudor queen. Queen Elizabeth I is the second Tudor queen. And she is Mary's half-sister. She was a Protestant, but she disapproved of radical Protestants and she disapproved of radical Catholics. She wanted everybody to just kind of believe what they believe and be on their way. She provided stability in England. Queen Mary left England in shambles. You know, there's a lot of bloodshed, a lot of crazy things happening. And when Queen Elizabeth took the throne, she kind of stabilized the area. And when she took the throne and everything kind of calmed down, that allowed the arts to flourish. So playwrights and paintings and poets, all of those things started to flourish under Queen Elizabeth's rule. And this is about the time that Shakespeare starts writing. So the last thing that I want you to look at is an example of one of those pieces of art from this period. This is called The Life and Death of Sir Henry Enten. And it shows you kind of that appreciation for the arts that is beginning to happen under Queen Elizabeth. It was still illegal at this point to speak out against the government. So if you had something bad to say about the crown, about the queen, you didn't say that out loud because you got in a lot of trouble. Maybe you're killed, maybe you're exiled, but you got in a lot of trouble for speaking against the throne. So the arts was a way to kind of speak out against the throne without being in trouble. You know, the plays that are put on stage, you could kind of create a story about a bad government if you wanted to, and people would just assume that it's a story unless the right people are hearing your play, and then they kind of see what you mean in the play itself, because it was a way to speak out against injustices in the world. One thing I want you to notice, or a couple of things rather I want you to notice, is over here on the right side of the painting, right here, we have a theater going on, a play, and the actors are down here on the bottom, and the people watching are up here on the top. And if you notice, all these people watching, they're much bigger. They're much bigger than the people down here playing their roles. You see this little guitar player guy right here, and there's a dancer right here, and they're very small. And this is kind of representative of the patrons being larger than the actors, meaning that the audience was more important than the art that was going on. It had to connect to the audience, or it wasn't worth anything. We have up here in the left, on the top left, we have this angel that is calling Sir Henry Enten to heaven, since this is the life and death of Sir Henry Enten. And down here we have a funeral procession. So if you just look at all the different pieces of this painting, there is so much going on. It's just a very interesting piece of art that is representative of the arts flourishing after Queen Elizabeth's rule. So that's all that I have for this week. It's just kind of a quick introduction to 16th century literature. Next week we will focus more on William Shakespeare himself before you read King Lear next week. If you have any questions, just shoot me an email. Thank you.